This week on the Wheelhouse. Live in the studio today, Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Connecticut's annual legislative session wrapped up 1 month ago. That doesn't mean the work is over for our state legislators. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont has been busy looking into which issues lawmakers will need to work out in a special session. And he's doing more things. This hour, he joins us to talk about it. He says he's more busy in the summer than he anticipated. I think we're all feeling that way. Do you have a question for Ned Lamont? Maybe ask him how his summer is going. Maybe ask him more of a fastball question. We're live this morning. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. And without further ado, Ned Lamont is the 89th governor of the state of Connecticut. Governor, great to have you on with us today.
Nice to see you, Frankie.
Very nice to see you. Right before the July 4th holiday, federal lawmakers passed the Trump domestic policy agenda. I'm sure you love hearing this. It's called the Big Beautiful Bill. It's something you've called reckless, cynical, and mean-spirited. Why are you calling it that?
Look, it's really damaging to governors across the country. We've just put together balanced budgets, keeping faith with our people, taking care of the folks most in need, making investments. And then this comes along, and it's going to slash Medicaid. It's going to slash nutrition and food. Some of it, I said cynical because all the goodies happen now, the tax cuts, yippee, this is wonderful. And probably a lot of the worst of the cuts happen after the midterm elections. But we have to think about that now and plan to make sure our most vulnerable aren't harmed.
I saw you the other day in Hartford at a federally qualified health center, and that's what you're talking about with Medicaid. There, you and other state officials addressed the bill's impact on the social safety net. What are you hearing from those local stakeholders at places like Charter Oak Health Center about Medicaid and the cuts that are coming?
That Medicaid is part of their lifeline and a lifeline for the people that they take care of. Look, I thought DOGE was going to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. Instead, all they're doing is shoving these cuts onto the backs of governors and on the backs of folks who really need it. I don't think getting people off of health care, off of Medicaid, makes any difference at all in terms of cost. All it does is shift it. It's going to be federally qualified health centers that have to take care of people who don't have insurance. Hospitals using uncompensated care, which means others are going to have to pay for them since Medicaid isn't. It's a bad move.
Will there be a special session this fall? First of all, I want to ask you that. And then if there is, how does this big, beautiful bill kind of change the business that you all have in front of you?
Look, there will be a special session. We're fixing the housing bill first and foremost. Matt Brockman's in close negotiations with the leadership there. I'd like to see that special session as soon as possible. Maybe July is getting a little tight in time frames, so that leaves September. But I think we have pretty good clarity right now about how the Trump budget's going to impact us. Not as much in this fiscal year as in out years, but still some things we probably want to fix.
The deficit, you all were talking about this the other day. I think you said $3 to $5 trillion. Are you getting closer to a number of how much you think this could put America in as far as debt? Is it $3 trillion, $5 trillion? What are you guys hearing?
First of all, at least we all agree it's going to make a bad situation a heck of a lot worse. And I don't think there's one Republican who was there in Washington 10 years ago would have supported a bill that makes the deficit this much worse, really punches the Titanic-sized hole that our kids and our grandkids are going to have to pay off. We're doing the opposite in Connecticut. We inherited a $35 billion debt, and we've been paying that off methodically every year, making life a little less weighty in the future. We can make investments we need to do.
Last time you were on the show in December, right before Christmas, I asked you if you were going to run for governor. You said you're already the governor, but if you were going to run for a third term, you said you had to wait until after the session. Okay, the session's over. Help me understand where you're going to be at. Are you going to run again?
Yeah, the state's in sort of a perpetual campaign mode, and I was trying to put that decision off, at least put the politics off as long as I could. I said once we got our budget done and the session was over, I said Susan and I are strongly considering doing this again. And we're strongly considering doing it. I'll make some sort of a formal announcement, I think, later this summer, early in the fall.
Later this summer, earlier in the fall. So you said the state's got a lot to do. You're perpetually campaigning. If there was a third term, help me understand what the theme of that might be, or at least something that you'd want to tackle that you haven't done yet.
We have a lot of unfinished business. I mean, we've built more new housing in the last few years than they did, in previous decades. Makes a big difference. But we need another 30, 40,000 units of housing spread all over the state. Make sure that there's a place for young people to be, maybe their grandparents to downsize so they can stay in the community they love. Every business leader I talk to talks about workforce and more workforce housing. We got way to go on healthcare. I mean, we've tried to bend the curve on pharmaceuticals, but healthcare costs are eating our budget alive as a state and really tough on working families as well. That'll be another priority for me.
I want to stick with housing, but first I'm going to invite folks to give us a call. We got the governor live in studio, and you may join him and ask him a question. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. The governor is standing by waiting to take your calls. I know he's excited to do so because he told me so in a video that we did together the other day. The housing veto is a signal to some that you're going to run again. Dan Haar, he's a columnist at CT Insider. He says it boosts speculation and, quote, the better to beat back a Republican challenge. Hey, what do you say to those who are cynical about the reason why the housing veto was made?
That they're cynical. Look, I talked to mayors and first selectmen, both sides of the aisle, all over the state. They thought the way the bill was presented to me was a little ambiguous. It sounded like a mandate, seemed a little heavy-handed, although the bill said towns take the lead. So I'm working with the legislative leadership, make sure that, as the title suggests, towns take the lead. Show us the number of units you're going to do, where you're going to put those units. Maybe you pre-zone it, make it easier, and we're going to be there as your partner going forward.
Can you help us with what actually happened with the veto? I think people want to know, were you prompted to veto it? How involved were you in the bill? I know you said you wish you might have had a little more influence in there, but I understand the bill might have been vetted through your office. So help us understand where the veto came.
Let's say there are 2,000 bills that circulate their way through legislature. I can't get involved in each and every one of them, but I really paid attention to a half dozen of them. But we do have our team is there at each of these, meetings as they weigh in on this. I didn't get as focused on this as I could have. I knew it was towns take the lead. I had to get into details a little bit to make sure there was some ambiguity there that was really scaring the heck out of a lot of our local mayors and first selectmen.
So then eventually there's detractors and there's people that are criticizing the bill. What are they telling you? What are they telling your office?
I'll tell them what I'm telling them, which is most of our towns are taking the lead. Most of the towns have given our Department of Housing their plan. We're building a lot of housing. It's not just in the cities, but, Wilton has added more new housing than just about any town in the state on a per capita basis. But that's not good enough. So we're going to double down on that, make it easier to build housing, faster to build housing, and we'll do that by making sure our mayors are they're alongside of us, not opposing us.
We have a comment from one of our listeners who is paying attention. That's why I was looking at my whatever this is here. I want to say laptop, but it's an iPad here. Dr. Karen Asurmali Fatu from Hartford. I live in elderly public housing. How can the governor help us move out of that? With the Trump budget, it's going to be harder to buy grocery when SNAP gets canceled, or at least if there's cuts to SNAP. I think this is what this person is trying to get at. Retired doctor. Would like you to talk about how families and how these situations here with the big beautiful bill are going to impact families.
I think the elderly are getting hit hard. Doctor, mentioned housing. I was in New Britain yesterday. We opened up another 154 units of housing in an old mill that you convert to housing for folks who live in New Britain. A lot of elderly able to be there right now. Look, we've eliminated Social Security tax up to $100,000 here in the state of Connecticut, making a difference on IRAs and pensions as well, doing what we can to help our seniors make sure that they can age here. You don't want to go to Florida and watch your kid grow up on Zoom. Come on.
Or be in there in July when it's 100 degrees plus the humidity. Just help me out with this, though. So I asked you about people being cynical earlier. So we talk about detractors, people that wanted you to veto the bill. What about people that say that this is some of the most meaningful legislation? Maybe it's progressive Democrats, whoever it is. These people want to know how you're going to help out with housing and how you're going to be able to maybe get somebody in New Canaan to get behind one of these proposals. What do you say to a progressive Democrat, maybe?
Well, look what we've done so far. I mean, we've doubled down the investments the state is making in housing. A Transfer Act and other things. We've sped up the environmental permitting process. I had one affordable housing guy. You can take this both ways. You know, we clipped the ribbon and said, here's the new housing. He said, I didn't get quite as much money as I wanted from the governor, but I got a lot faster, and that's why we're building the housing right here. So we're stretching those dollars to make sure it's affordable for everybody. Look, like I said, Wilton, of all places, has grown more housing than just about anybody else. So it is spread around, but there's some that are outliers, and we're going to push them harder.
We're asking people to call in today to talk to the governor, 888-720-9677. That's the number to call, 888-720-9677. Also got a few questions from Instagram, thanks to our great social team here at Connecticut Public, Governor Lamont. Greg Ostrinsky wants to know if you'll ask lawmakers to amend the housing proposal as part of the special session.
Yes, but I'm doing this in association with mayors, first selectmen, and most importantly, Jason Rojas and Bob Duff, who took the lead in the legislature. Make sure we get on one page, something where we pass, we can all get behind together.
All right, help me understand what's going to get your yeah here on the bill. What do you need to see in there exactly? Or can there be, some people always talk about the carrot and the stick. Some people are saying, hey, maybe this is too much of a stick. Maybe some people are hoping you can lean on the municipalities a little more, but help me just kind of help me with the playbook here on how it's going to get the governor's stamp of approval.
Hey, mayors. Hey, first selectmen. Here's your opportunity. Many of you, most of you have given us your plan going forward. And you're acting on it, and we're your partner there, whether it's, new rail station or high school or water and sewer. We'll be there to help you do it. And I'm pushing you even harder to make sure you make this decision. I want you to determine what your town is going to look like in 10 years, but you got to think about it. You can't just say no. Too many people around here just say no.
Can you point to other successes that you had in the 2025 legislative session? I know we're talking about a special session that may be coming up in September, but help me understand other successes you might have had here in the 2025 legislative session.
Frankly, I'm proudest of, as we've talked about it for years, which is early childhood education. And we made a $250, $300 million down payment on that endowment. And over a few years, we're going to be able to provide free early childhood for all families earning up to about $100,000 a year. That saves families $6,000 or $7,000 a year. It allows mom and dad to get back to work. And most importantly for me, gives that kid the very best head start. Every kindergarten teacher I talk to says, I can tell that kid that comes from a really good pre-K program.
I had Beth By sitting in that seat, and she said about how you gave her a phone call. Can you help us understand a little bit behind the scenes on how that all came together, at least this proposal where you're trying to make sure that most people in Connecticut, pretty much all of them, will have some kind of help with childcare?
Beth is the best. And she's been pushing pretty hard, but she's been pushing on an open door. So we've been thinking about how we do this in a way that's consistent and reliable going forward. That's why I've created an endowment. This endowment is just for early childhood education. You can't rob it. You can't take it away. If there's a downturn in the economy, you still have that endowment so these kids can count on it.
Hey, we got a phone call, somebody from New London. Here's Gabe. Gabe wants to know about schools. We just talked about childcare. Let's talk about schools. Go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, hi. I'm currently a teacher in Connecticut, and I teach in New London, where our budget was severely cut this year, and we had to cut a bunch of staff. Not as much as New Haven, which cut even more, but I thought it was interesting you were talking about early education, where our budget cuts have led to cutting teachers from our early education programs as well, where they have less or no arts available to them because all those teachers were either completely removed or cut back so much that they don't have as much as they used to. So I'm wondering how you're going to support our teachers when at the local level, at the mayoral level, they want to take money away from schools, and at the state level, we're losing funding and grants so that we have less and less teachers, but more and more students.
Gabe, thank you so much for the call. Go ahead, Governor.
Well, at the state level, you're not losing money or grants. We've held every town harmless, increased our state funding for K through 12 education every year I've been here, including in this budget, making a difference. It was tough because there was a little extra money during COVID. That's not there anymore. That was COVID related. We tried to do everything we can to increase our funding for education. We've got the LEAP programs, so we're knocking on doors so those kids that maybe don't feel comfortable getting back to school, they're coming back into the classroom now. We have apprentice teachers, so rather than spending that third year at the teacher's college in the ivory tower studying in a book, you're in a classroom as an apprentice teacher. We're doing everything we can to make your job easier, and I want to thank you. I thank each and every one of our public school teachers. We have the best in the country. We're standing by you.
I want to have a little fun with Gabe's question because you're saying you're doing everything you can. I understand this. Within what you can do with budget reserves, because there's going to be Democrats, some people in your own party that are going to say that you could do more with budget reserves. Help us understand how far you could really dip into that. You've done it for Medicaid here, especially for some emergency dollars. But I was poking fun at you earlier in the year when we were talking about special education funding and how you guys were able to find $54 million, which it seems like it's a lot of money, but you guys had to do a lot of work to find $54 million. I think it was 14 in the first year and then 40 in the second year. So help us understand what you could do, I guess. Can you go into budget reserves to get more money for education, or is this what you could do, the best that you could do, essentially?
So we had no rainy day fund to speak of some years back. Now we've got $4 billion in there. I know it's burning a hole in everybody's pocket. Everybody I run against for governor has spent it 3 times over. It's there for a really good purpose. You know, going back 8 years ago, we were lurching from deficit to deficit, raising taxes, deficit. Education funding was getting cut at the state level. We're not going to let that happen if we have another recession. They always come. I'm going to make sure that we don't have to raise taxes and tell Gabe we can continue to provide the funding we owe people. That's what the rainy day fund's about. You're right. In this day and age, with President Trump making some sudden and severe cuts, we're going to have to look at the rainy day fund as well there to see. I can't make it up all. It's going to be billions in cuts, but we can help.
Let's spend the last couple of questions here talking about energy, because I know you were excited about the bipartisan proposal. I do want to talk about that because I know there's going to be ratepayers out there that are going to be like, that's great, Governor, but why the hell am I paying so much for my electric bill? We're going to talk about that in a second. We're also going to get to a caller. I imagine that one sticking point you may have that you kind of almost had to concede when the new president was elected was that there's going to be less credits essentially for people that are doing right by the environment by having energy resources available. So that might be coming down in the big, beautiful bill, it looks like. A lot of turning back of the Inflation Reduction Act with what President Biden worked on. So just help me understand your concerns about where the country is going in terms of maybe using more fossil fuels.
Pull the lens back. Look at the forest fires in L.A. Look at the flooding in Texas, North Carolina. There are impacts of climate change. Look at what happened in Connecticut, down in the Naugatuck Valley. That flooding cost us tens of millions of dollars. And rather than try and deal with some of the root causes of that, now they want to roll back on FEMA, which is the way we help people there. Anyway, I think the credits they had for renewable energy made an awful lot of sense. What I can't stand about the federal government, they're on again, off again, on again, off again. As a business guy, that's a lousy way to run a railroad. We don't know what we can count on, what we can invest upon right now. And he's not getting rid of all the credits. He's just going to give a credit to coal instead of wind. Go figure.
SB 4, that's the energy bill that we all hear here is bipartisan. It's an effort that was worked on by both parties. I think Ryan Fazio was pretty involved in it as well, the Republican senator from Greenwich. So a lot of people may want to know, you guys are working on the public benefits charge in order to try to make sure that people do spend a little less money on their electricity. Can some of what you all are doing in SB 4 mitigate what's happening at the federal government with all this back and forth?
Let's say last summer was a really hot summer and people saw their July and August energy bills and went ballistic. So that resulted in this energy bill we worked on together with the Republicans on a very bipartisan basis, taking some of the public benefits and putting that over to bonding. You're not really saving money. You're just shifting the money there a little bit. We're going to continue, to work on that. Turn down the air conditioner just a little bit because even though rates are going down on July 1st, it could be your bill goes up a little bit because of how hot the weather has been. And we're doing everything we can. We're bringing down solar from Maine. We got onshore wind from Maine. And I'm also talking in terms of nuclear power, so get more generation so we can have more generation, which will bring down the cost of electricity over time.
We have one last question for you, Governor. It's not coming from me, though. It sounds like it's going to come from Michael from Stratford. Go ahead, your energy-related question. Hi, Michael.
Hi, good morning, Governor and Wheelhouse. I just had a quick question, which was, will the state continue to be investing in offshore wind? It seems like a really positive direction for the state.
Thank you, Michael.
Here's the deal, Michael. I like offshore wind. Donald Trump hates offshore wind. He likes coal. I'm not a big fan of coal. So you got to find where we are. So my instinct is there's not going to be a lot of new offshore wind over the next 4 or 5 years. As you know, we've got State Pier. We got Revolution Wind. Revolution Wind's going to turn on in a little over a year. That's going to add a lot of capacity to our carbon-free capacity to our overall grid. That's going to make a difference.
20 quality minutes with Governor Ned Lamont. We're happy to give that to you here on the Wheelhouse. Thank you, Governor, for coming on the show. We appreciate it very much.
20 minutes anyway. Thanks.
I appreciate you spending that much time with us and then some. Thank you, Governor. After the break, some analysis on what we just heard from a panel of experts, including Liz Koranowitz, Bilal Siku, and Mark Pasniokis. They're standing by, waiting to talk about what we just heard. What are your thoughts? Give us a call, 888-720-9677. 720-9677, and stay tuned to the Wheelhouse. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning. Governor Ned Lamont just joined us on the Wheelhouse. A lot to dissect in an attempt to understand what direction Connecticut is going in. I got a great panel to help us do that. Mark Pasniokis, Paz Connecticut Mirror's Capital Bureau Chief. He co-founded the Mirror, actually, as well. So good to have you on.
Good to be here.
You're always working, including trying to get a comment from the governor right beforehand. So you guys got to stay tuned to CT Mirror.
Well, this is a convenience store. You grab what you can off the shelf.
I'm always learning from Mark. I appreciate it very much. Liz Koranowitz, Republican analyst and co-owner of the Jury Group. Liz, great to see you here today.
Good morning.
Great to have you up here.
Thank you. I have to say, my stomach dropped a little. I'm very familiar with being in those circumstances as Paz is.
I did the same thing the other day. I went up to the governor. I was like, hey, do something for social media so people know you're coming on so we can get some phone calls. And I think it worked so that we can get people in here. Because we want to bring the politics to the people. And if somebody's going to bring the politics to the people, you want it to be the professor, Bilal Siku, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford.
Hey, good morning, Frankie, and go Hawks.
Okay, I thought you were going to forget for a second. I got nervous. Hey, we hope you'll join the conversation. 888-720-9677. 888-720-9677. Mark, you've now heard Governor Lamont on Medicaid for the umpteenth time, and he'll soon call lawmakers in to address this issue, I would imagine, somehow. But is the nuance he's trying to convey, or at least what's happening with Medicaid here as you've tried to talk to him, that there's only so much the state can do to backfill whatever is going to be missing from the federal government?
Well, two things. There's only so much the state can do, and it's also unclear at this point still what it is the state will need to do, because the Medicaid, a lot of the Medicaid cuts are triggered by other things, right? There'll be a work requirement. Well, almost 3/4 of the people in Connecticut who are on Medicaid are currently working part-time.
I think we've heard 70%, yeah.
Yeah, 73% of the numbers that they've put out based on reviews of census data and whatnot. And then the other thing is, the state may be more responsible for SNAP, the Food Assistance Program. Well, that also has triggers in it, and that trigger is the Trump administration's bill will require the states to have an error rate of 6%. Connecticut currently has an error rate of 10%. So there's still a lot that they need to suss out as to truly what the impact of the cuts will be in Connecticut. And as the governor said to you a little while ago, the effective dates of those cuts really won't be felt until 2026. So it's going to be interesting what it is they attempt to do in the special session this fall. Now, the other shoe that will fall is there will be presumably also a continuing resolution in addition to this one big, beautiful bill. And the question is, what other changes will occur that Connecticut will have to respond to?
Joe Courtney said, I think 190,000 people could be dropped from health care coverage. Is that kind of the scale that we're understanding? You're saying it might not take place until about 2026 or the middle of 2026?
That's how the bill is drafted. But yes, in addition to Medicaid, there's also the question of one of the biggest impacts of the Affordable Care Act under President Obama was the expansion of Medicaid, and that expansion was 90% covered by the feds as opposed to the typical 50-50 split. But that's the other question of how much more difficult will it be for people to take advantage of the Affordable Care Act?
The Center of Budget and Policy Priorities. I got this research from the Lamont team here. They responded to my request here. A national nonpartisan think tank. They say 34,000 state residents could lose some or all of their SNAP benefits. So we're just trying to give you a scale here of what the issue could be like here in Connecticut. Bilal, we had the governor's answers to my questions. We're going to get some more PAS analysis soon. But are you getting a sense that the state's going to do everything they can for Medicaid?
I guess just a couple quick comments to what Paz was saying. Certainly they tried to delay a lot of the pain until after the midterm elections, which I think is very strategic on their part. I think the real harm here and the potential for harm is that the work requirements, and I think we need to be cautious about sort of looking at them in a benign way, because ultimately this has been tried out in several states and it's been a failure. And what has happened is that the paperwork becomes so cumbersome that people are unable to do it, and that's how people end up dropping off the program. And so when Republicans say we're not cutting anything, they actually are trying to create a process that will be sort of difficult to manage on the parts of people uploading information online where you may not have internet access. You may have to go to a McDonald's parking lot to fill out the forms for your Medicaid, for example, and your health care. And so that's the real risk. I think the other thing is this has been framed around a discourse talking about able-bodied people. But we know a lot of the people who are on Medicaid are elderly. We know a lot are also children. And so when we talk about kicking people off of Medicaid, parents, for example, potentially, losing their access to health coverage or SNAP, we're also talking about harming children, which may have harmful effects that carry on for a very long time in their lifetimes. And so, certainly Connecticut will try to respond. I don't know how effective they'll be able to respond in the short run because there's so much about this we don't know because, again, they've delayed some of the most painful parts of this until a couple more years.
One of the points you may be trying to make here is that when you try to put work requirements on somebody, essentially you're trying to wean them off of Medicaid, I would imagine. But income is in such a way that not everybody's going to be able to, even whatever they make, be able to be whole by whatever happens.
And the governor made a really important point that I think a lot more of us who think about this issue and worry about this should point out is that people will still access health care in some way. And so the question will be how Connecticut residents will either pay for this through taxes and federal taxes, or you will pay for this because your insurance will go higher, the cost of coverage for people who have health insurance will go higher because doctors and hospitals will need to charge us to make up for the losses that they may incur while trying to help people who need access to health care.
Governor Ned Lamont hasn't confirmed whether or not he's running for a third term. We're not sure if he's running yet, but after his housing veto, you said the word cynical, Bilal. Some people may be cynical. It seems that some Republican lawmakers and municipal officials, though, are happy with the governor right now. How might that hurt or help his chance at a third term, Liz?
Look, I think when you're talking, I don't think that the governor's veto of the housing bill was a signal. I think the governor listened very clearly to what was being said by people in his own party, right? There were a lot of Democrat legislators that voted against that bill. As the governor will tell you and others in the building will tell you that there are Democrats who voted for the bill that asked for it to be vetoed because they heard from their mayors and first selectmen who are also Democrats that said this is a bad bill. This is not what we need at the local level. So I think it's disingenuous to sort of say this is a Republican partisan effort. I think that this was a bipartisan cry at the legislative and municipal level to say this is not good for Connecticut. I think that when you're looking at the solution, obviously, the governor has to bring all the stakeholders to the table, and hopefully that includes a bipartisan panel of Republican legislators and mayors and first selectmen to craft a bill that works for everyone. But I don't think the bill itself has an effect on the governor's reelection. I do think it will have a material effect on legislators. I think the Republican message there rightly should be that if you elect more Democrats to the legislature, this is the kind of legislation you are going to get. And how many vetoes will the governor be able to effectively perpetuate, whether it's a Republican governor or a Democrat governor? And there are Democrat legislators who voted for that bill who live in towns and districts and places that are against it. And by the way, that's not just a suburban issue. There are a lot of urban legislators who were against it as well.
Mark, does what the governor said today about why he vetoed the housing bill jive with your understanding of how it actually played out?
Well, a couple of things. His answer that there are 2,000 bills and he only gets a chance to really look at a dozen, I don't think that's a winning answer for him now or in the future if he runs. But the thing that is consistent about Ned Lamont, by Connecticut standards, he is more of a centrist than a leftist. He always wants to see sort of at least a bipartisan gloss on these very difficult things. He has, from the moment he ran the first time, has been very hesitant to take positions that would push the municipalities to change their zoning. He has really emphasized carrots more than sticks. He talks about transit-oriented development, and he was in New Britain yesterday with a Republican mayor who also has embraced what you can do if you have available land near the busway, and that's what Mayor Stewart has done in New Britain. So there's a certain consistency to his position. The inconsistency was his administration was at the table when they negotiated the final version. So for him to suggest that he was surprised by what's in there, that doesn't fly, to the extent that if he didn't know, he certainly should have known.
I want to get your assessment on the situation, Bilal, from this perspective. I understand that you spoke to Erin Boggs from the Connecticut Open Communities Alliance about her thoughts on the veto. What are we missing from this conversation, or what did you want to hear from the governor?
I mean, to be perfectly transparent, I'm vice chair of the board for Open Communities Alliance. And
Mr. Transparency, thank you.
And actually, I was surprised and count me as cynical in terms of the decision to actually veto this bill. I think this has been one of the most high-profile pieces of legislation throughout this session and certainly in recent years in terms of the amount of press coverage and discussion about the bill. Connecticut is a state in which we have a high sort of rate, one of the lowest rental vacancy rates of any state in the country. So we need access to rental properties. We need access to affordable housing in our state. We're a state where we're well behind in housing permits in terms of actually with construction of housing. And the list sort of goes on in terms of why something like this was needed. And so the governor's office was walking hand in hand with legislative leaders in crafting this legislation from the very beginning. And so, like Mark, I was kind of surprised that he actually said he didn't follow this bill, didn't know a lot about it.
Because think about the position. You talked to Jason Rojas is the backdrop I want to put here. But think about the position he's in. He kind of gave it his best shot. I would imagine he thought that he had a buy-in from the governor's office, whatever. He's saying in 45 days, local officials would be thinking about being up for election. How does that, you got to help us understand if there can actually, this meaningful change they thought they were going to enact, is there now not a path?
Jason Rojas, the House Majority Leader, who is one of the prime sponsors, made a very relevant point when the governor said, I now want to immediately convene a meeting and invite the mayors and first selectmen to come in and sit down. And the point Jason Ross made is many of these men and women will be on the ballot this fall. And the idea that going into a campaign season, they're going to sit down and sign off on something that's going to put greater pressure on many of these municipalities to be a little bit more open to affordable housing, to some zoning changes, to density changes, that seems to be very unlikely. And that was Representative Rojas's point. And I think Ms. Karantowicz, who has some small experience in these matters, might agree with Jason on that.
You could say, it can cut both ways, right? If you're at the table and you're advocating for an outcome, you can go back to your constituents and say, look, I'm at the table. And I think this is particularly important for Democrats who are running for re-election in their municipalities, because there is a lot of tension there, right? There are a lot of Democrat municipal leaders who were against this bill, and they have Democrat legislators who voted for it, right? So there is a grassroots level tension there between these parties. So when you're talking about having a seat at the table in Democrat towns, that is likely a very important thing. For Republicans who are at the table, they're going to be able to say to their constituents, I'm fighting to make sure that we maintain local control of our zoning, which is important. And it is as crazy and awful as it are, 169 little fiefdoms can seem to others. It is the way we do things, the land of steady habits. And so that means something to people. And that's why they choose where they live and their communities. So I do think it has an effect on their local elections, and it doesn't have to be one where they stay out of it.
I'm sort of rather facetiously pulling up the Connecticut General Assembly statutes in front of me, and I don't see, this is all a joke, obviously, but I don't see where it says that there's local control. I think you put this in your story, right? There's no local control.
Yeah, we should.
By statute, at least, by statute.
Well, and we should remind listeners that zoning is an authority of the state that's delegated to the municipalities. And so that's the legal underpinning of why the state can impose changes. On the other hand, home rule is so ingrained in Connecticut culture, it may be a moot point.
Mark, Bilal, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely ingrained, and I think it's to the detriment of access to affordable and decent housing for a lot of people in the state because it is so ingrained. But, once again, this was a piece of legislation that made it out of the legislature. And there have been a number of years in which these efforts really failed, right? Got nowhere. This is a piece of legislation that the governor and the governor's office was working with lawmakers to make possible. And so, it was towns take the lead. We can sort of talk about, some of the detail of it. Certainly, for viewers that would be sort of enlightening. But I think at the end of the day, this was one of the better efforts made in recent years to try to accommodate both the interests, the needs of local communities, to provide that carrot to do something to be productive and building affordable housing. And I think in many ways, it really reflects on just how challenging this issue really is.
Towns can take the lead all they want. I don't know if they're going to want to build affordable housing.
That, I think, is really what the critical issue is.
It might be a good time to remind folks that while you're on the beach this year, a lot of that, most of it, I think there's only 7 miles that's public. For folks in Connecticut, most of it. I understand if you go to other places in the country, California namely, a lot of that has to be open, but it is private in Connecticut. Just throwing that into the conversation. The housing bill isn't the only bill Lamont vetoed after the session. Lamont vetoed Senate Bill 8, which would have provided jobless benefits to strikers in Connecticut. I didn't really get time to talk to the governor about that, but Mark spoke with Ed Hawthorne, the president of the Connecticut AFL-CIO, the Labor Federation. Ed said to you that the state-elected Democrats put this bill on Ned's desk, and he sided with Republicans. We also had a call about this issue. Catherine from Middletown says she thinks the veto highlights a deeper problem in the state. What's your take on Catherine's point there, Mark, and your take on how the governor handled this striking workers' rights during the session?
Unlike the housing veto, the governor has been clear and he has been consistent regarding his opposition to providing jobless benefits for strikers. there is an argument as to why this would not have to be as harmful as business people might think. This goes into the balance of power, labor management, which is kind of a graduate level argument, not a soundbite thing. But Ned Lamont is, like, as I said, he was consistent. He was clear. There was no surprise. He's very comfortable with that veto. But it is one of the things that adds to the tension between him and the political left in Connecticut.
I wanted to make sure we got Catherine's point in there, but we got to get the heck out of here because we have one more segment left and only a few minutes left to talk about 2026 and the governor's race. We've got a bunch of updates for you. I asked the governor about it. Let's talk about it more. You're listening to the Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public. I'm Frankie Graziano. Still with me, Mark Pasniokis, Connecticut Mirror's Capital Bureau Chief, Liz Karanowitz, Republican analyst and co-owner of the Drury Group, and Bilal Siku, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford. Early in the show, I spoke with Governor Ned Lamont and asked him if he'd run for another term. He said he's thinking about it, and he'll make a formal announcement sometime during the end of the summer or early fall. I guess the goalpost moved a little bit. I talked to him earlier in the year, and he said maybe after the session. Whatever. There's a lot of business to take care of, Paz. I know that. If viewers tuned in today and they wanted a more definitive answer, maybe they're disappointed. But help us understand at least why he's not coming out with it yet and why he hasn't exactly spelled it out. Because I'm assuming the governor's running for a third term.
I have a pretty good... I mean, my experience is you don't announce something like that in the middle of the summer when you have the least amount of attention from voters, right?
Yes.
I mean, so if you just look at media consumption goes down significantly over the summer. People are not in front of their television screens. They're out doing activities, whether it's at the beach or what have you on vacation. So you don't have the captive audience of your intended voter, number one. And number two, I mean, from a fundraising perspective, certainly you don't want to be announcing in the middle of the summer. It is the worst time of year to try and raise money. Not that that's a concern of the governor's, but usually you want a captive audience when you're making a big announcement. And the summer is probably the worst possible time.
You're saying
to
that
do
the governor's not going to get a lot of public funding.
I mean, it would be an interesting tactical move for him to try and utilize the public financing system.
Not gonna happen.
I don't think that's going to happen.
All right, let's set the scene here. So we got a potential run for the governor that we imagine may be coming. That announcement may be coming soon. An exploratory run from Aaron Stewart, the Republican. We have Jen Tooker, who's firmly in the race from Westport. She's their first selectman. And also now we have developing news over the last 12 hours, last 24 hours. Mark Pasniokis, who you got?
So Josh Elliott, who is one of the more liberal members of the General Assembly, who has been hinting that the governor would not go unchallenged seeking the Democratic nomination. So he filed his papers yesterday. He did not have an announcement. He is not taking a page from Liz Karanowitz's book, which I agree with her wholeheartedly when it comes to somebody who's trying to make that first impression for a broader audience. It's less important for Ned Lamont seeking a third term who doesn't have financial issues and he doesn't have name ID issues. But for anybody else, Liz Karanowitz is 100% right.
Just mark that, could you, and just send it to me so I can keep that for the
Dylan
future.
Reyes.
But
Our
just
technical director is
dropping
doing that right now.
Yeah, dropping
you.
your papers in without an announcement. It's kind of an odd thing. He's going to do a formal announcement Monday.
See, I'm the cynical guy. I think that announcement doesn't come until after that special session because I think, when the governor made the decision and he sort of floated out the idea of running for re-election, and again, this goes back to my sort of thoughts about whether he was involved and knew much about what was inside of that bill. I think ultimately, if we look at turnout in cities over the last few presidential years, especially in election cycles and government cycles, turnout has been in decline in urban communities. This governor realizes that he needs the votes, and he increasingly depends upon the votes of people who live in suburban communities. And so I think ultimately this decision going into September and what they actually will decide if they have that special session will affect how he makes that announcement, because I think ultimately shaping that outcome in a way that does not harm his prospects in the suburbs, I think will be really key for him.
And that's an important point, Bilal, because those voters are not turning out and voting Republican. They're just not being turned out. And that has sort of been, I think, a conscientious effort from my conversations among Democrats who have just said that they're just not doing tactically the voter turnout efforts in the cities that they used to do.
This is all about, at least with Josh Elliott, the governor getting a challenge from his party or from the left, whatever you want to say. Is this a time where a primary challenger might have a better shot than 18 and 22? Mark, when Liz, you go ahead. When
the threshold
he kind of absorbed his competition in 18 and 22.
I think if you look at just on its face, the barriers to entry for candidates to get into a real primary are nearly impossible, right? I mean, first there are financial thresholds. In order to get access to the state citizens election program, you have to raise a very high threshold of qualifying dollars in order to get the grant and then run some sort of a real campaign. In order to qualify for the primary and therefore the primary dollars, you have to obtain 15% at your Democrat or Republican convention, or you need to go out and collect 2% of signatures from 2% of the registered partisans in your respective party. For Josh Elliott or another Democrat, that it's about 18,000-ish good Democrat signatures. And given the rejection rate among those signatures of bad signatures, bad papers, all of those things, so they have to go collect about 36,000 of them. It is a near impossible task.
The simple way to say it then, for layman out there, I'm layman. Layman's going to ask, do I have to be a self-funded candidate with traction to get on the ballot? So there's a lot that has to happen.
Ned Lamont in 2006 against Joe Lieberman.
Stemmerman couldn't get on the ballot, for example.
Certainly helps,
a Republican.
But no, it is certainly possible to qualify. But no, to Liz's point, I mean, it's accurate what she said. It is difficult. But it raises another question, which is, what is Josh Elliott's true agenda and goal? Is he trying to make a point? Is he trying to perhaps make the governor think twice? The governor, to his point, he's not 100% committed one way or the other. So there has been a hope among some in certain labor unions, not all, but can they basically harass the governor? Can they make it clear that this is not going to be the easy glide to renomination?
We only got about a minute left in the show, so we got to say Ryan Fazio. Give us a few seconds here. Ryan Fazio, the Republican from Greenwich, he may be in the race. Not yet, but he may be at some point.
I think that's another one who will contemplate this over the summer. His indications in the media anyway have been that he is very strongly considering it, but there again, it would be ill-advised to start a statewide campaign from a place where nobody knows you from in the summer.
And Bilal, in 20 seconds or less, a progressive candidate, do they really have a shot by what they've outlined?
I think right now the thinking perhaps on Elliott's part is the next governor race, putting his name out there and maybe being a viable candidate afterwards. I think,
and I know Liz might not agree that that's a good strategy.
Right, but in many ways,
10 seconds left. Go ahead.
There's no way that progressives are going to push Lamont further to the left, so... Yeah.
You've been listening to Liz Karanowitz, Republican analyst and co-owner of the Drury Group. Liz, thank you for being on the show
Thank you
today.
for having me.
Bilal Siku, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at University of Hartford. Thank you for coming on.
Frankie.
And Mark Pasniokis, Connecticut Mirror's Capitol Bureau Chief. Mark, appreciate your insights today.
Thank you.
Man, what a show we have. Thank you to the governor for coming on. Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn, edited by Patrick Scale. You guys did a phenomenal job on the show. So did technical producer Dylan Ray. A special thanks to the rest of our team here at Connecticut Public. Download the Wheelhouse wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.